today I got some drugs in the post, actually, for the first time, as far as I know. I got a joint, and yeah, it certainly is a real joint, judging by the smell of it anyway. It's fairly flat. It's kind of two-dimensional, having been inside a letter, and it came from a group of people, including cannabisreform.ie, Relief, Artisan Coffee Bar, Martin's World and others, and they want National Legalise Cannabis Day to be celebrated. They say this is the 20th anniversary of this action. It was started by Luke Ming Flanagan back in 2001, now an MEP, and they say that they have yet again engaged in this campaign of civil disobedience in the hope that the government would end this inhumane prohibition of a plant which, when used correctly, can be incredibly beneficial. There's plenty more besides in this letter, but to discuss some of the issues around relaxing the rules when it comes to cannabis, I'm joined by Garrett McGovern, who's a GP specialising in alcohol and substance abuse from the Priority Medical Clinic in Dundrum. Garrett, you're very welcome to the show. It's good to talk to you. I understand you're a GP more than a legal scholar, but you might just, first of all, because I understand you'll know this better than most of us, the difference between legalisation, which is what this group of people are looking for, and decriminalisation, which is what other people talk about.
Yeah, so these two terms are frequently kind of conflated, which doesn't help the argument. So I suppose we'll take decriminalisation first, and that is not legalisation. So that basically means that the drugs would still remain in an illegal market, but the possession of those drugs wouldn't be prosecuted. So the person wouldn't be criminalised who's found in receipt of those drugs. So this could be cannabis, it could be cocaine, it could be heroin. Legalisation is a completely different gig altogether. I mean, you only have to look at alcohol and tobacco. And if you know what alcohol and tobacco legalisation is, it's fairly easy to understand what cannabis legalisation might be. So there's a proper market, there's quality testing, there are sales, there are jobs, it's not criminalised at all anymore. And if you look at the US, I think there are 19 states now in America which have legalised recreational cannabis, and there are going to be more coming downstream. So that's kind of the difference between the two. My own feeling is we're not going to get legalisation anytime soon. I don't think. There seems to be a resistance to it. I personally would like to see cannabis regulated, but I'd like to see it regulated properly. I don't want to see any. I mean, the area that I work in, obviously, I treat people who have cannabis problems, and I don't want to make those cannabis problems worse. But I also treat many people who are merely seeing me for the mere fact that they've been prosecuted, and really, in many cases, they don't really have that much of an actual addiction, you might say, to cannabis, and I don't think that's right. So I'd like to see it regulated and regulated properly, I suppose, Kieran, is what I'm trying to say. Criminalisation is a no-brainer. I really don't think anybody in receipt of drugs for personal use should be criminalised, and that'll always be my view. I won't.
Yeah, I should say that this letter puts it, I think, well. They say, be advised that this product you're holding in your hand was sourced from an unregulated market, and you as a consumer have very little protection. There's no guarantee that this joint contains any cannabis, and if it does contain cannabis, you as a consumer have no idea as to the potency of that cannabis, and this makes dosing incredibly difficult and could put you at risk. That's the argument in favour of a regulated market, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about knowing the dose. You're talking about knowing the other constituents in cannabis. And I know that if you look at the research abroad, and the problem we have with this is the very polarising argument, because you will get people coming on who, in my own profession, who will say, no, that doesn't work. It's, nothing but problems in Canada and the US. But if you look at the research over there, I think we have to be honest about the research coming out of it in terms of outcomes. It's very mixed. And it does tell you a little bit about the way research is kind of done. I mean, I often think sometimes that research, people who set out to find fault in cannabis will the outcomes will be what they want it to be. And likewise, people who think legalisation is great. So there's a lack of kind of honesty in this whole area. I think we have to be kind of upfront about this. And you have to remember as well, Kieran, we're in an environment and a paradigm in Ireland where it is illegal. So any of the harms that are currently occurring in Ireland can't be blamed on legalisation. They have to be blamed on prohibition. And I think we have to be honest about that. And one thing I do see an awful lot where people are very much in the prohibition corner is that they will talk about how bad legalisation is, but they actually don't talk at all about how bad prohibition is.
Yes.
The very paradigm that cannabis is regulated under.
Yeah, but one of the things they do talk about, and you mentioned people in your own profession, Bobby Smith, I know you've spoken, you've debated with him before, the psychiatrist, Ray Wally, the GP, as well, another GP, well-known GP, formerly of the IMO as well, who would appear on this show regularly on different issues. They've both been quite vocal in opposition, maybe, or they might not like it described that way. They might say that they would like just more debate about how this would all work. And I think the phrase they've used is that we're sleepwalking into legalising a drug that they say has really negative side effects.
I don't think there's any doubt that Dr. Wally and Dr. Smith want cannabis to remain illegal. I don't think it's about necessarily more debate. I think there is more debate. I don't see either of those doctors shifting on it. But then again, they could accuse me of not shifting on it either. But I would like a debate really where we review drug laws according to the evidence. I mean, we should be looking at the 1977 Drug Misuse Act and asking, right, what can we do with this? It is a very old act, 1977 now. It's 44 years old. It's never really been reviewed. And, I work in an area, and I work in some very marginalised communities where they're ravaged by illicit drugs. And we don't seem to change that. We seem to kind of just keep going and, hoping in some way that one day we'll wake up and it'll all go away. Well, it isn't going to go away. The people are dying, in those environments. And
but
the
Garrett,
illegality of drug
is the danger that they're ravaged then by legal drugs?
Yeah, I mean, look, can I be very clear on this? I treat more alcohol than any other drug in my own clinic, and we haven't got alcohol regulation right. But I often do say, because I have heard people use that argument, and I would say, well, if you think the drug wars are bad, could you imagine what the alcohol wars would be like? I mean, if you legalised alcohol, and we have evidence of it back in the 20s in the US in prohibition, I don't think we can do that. Can I say this? We're never going to get a perfect model of either. That's the problem. There's going to be harm, there's going to be addiction. And I just think that we've got to look at our drug-related deaths and our alcohol-related deaths. We're very, very high in the EU and indeed worldwide in terms of where we stand in that. And we have to look at the legality and illegality of drugs and see what contribution is that making to these deaths and harms.
I'd like to hear your take on an argument I've heard, and it's that the supervised injection centres are actually the wedge that opens the door to decriminalisation, because essentially the argument being you'd have to change some of the laws around possession if you were going to operate these centres in Ireland. You couldn't have the guards roaming around just outside the front door kind of arresting people for having a little bit of drugs when we're encouraging them to go into these centres with drugs. Do you think that there's truth, there's merit in that argument?
I don't, I suppose, because I see that, I don't see that through that prism. I kind of see it in terms of, the safety of our, streets and alleyways. I mean, you only have to walk around Dublin City and you'll see strewn needles, for people, and particularly young people, to be exposed to. And I see it all too often, people in public car parks injecting behind cars and stuff like that. So I just looked at it for a safety point of view in terms of bringing people out of a very undignified area who are going to be injecting anyway, Kieran. Let's be straight about it. There's no point in pretending we're going to educate them out of it. There are huge social issues there, huge social inequality, problems that will never be fixed overnight. And it isn't a panacea, we know that, but it will at least keep people alive and perhaps, link them in with other services. It sounds very grim for people who don't kind of understand that argument, the idea that you would give people a place to inject in. But I mean, if you look at the 100 or so centres worldwide, they seem to be, well received.
But do you suspect, though, and maybe I kind of worded that question poorly, I mean, do you suspect that that's the first domino that has to be pushed? Because, if you get the supervised injection centre over the line, you have, as a consequence, some relaxation of the rules around possession, and that's the kind of the domino you push that you get to the point of decriminalisation.
Yeah, well, I think decriminalisation should be fairly straightforward. If it's not for you're not going to criminalise for personal use, well, then that definitely, there has to be some sort of amnesty in terms of people in injecting centres. They can't go in and then they're on the way in, they get, arrested on the way in. But I just don't think there's any argument across the board for criminalising people who are using drugs, and there are a lot of people using drugs. If the goal of criminalising people is to deter use and reduce prevalence, it has failed. And then I have to ask the question, well, then if it's failing, why are we continuing to do it? I don't see any other reason for doing it.
Garrett, listen, a pleasure to speak to you. As always, Garrett McGovern, GP specialising in alcohol and substance abuse from the Priority Medical Clinic in Dundrum. This letter that came today with the joint in the post, it goes on to say, Kieran, as you are now in possession of this cannabis joint, you should contact Gardaí to come and remove it, or feel free to consume it if you wish. Of course, we'll always do the right thing here on The Hard Shoulder.